Okay.
Didn't do so well, maybe. Okay, so euthanasia. Where to begin? Actually, I'll start where I always like to start, which is by introducing my family. So, a little bit about me, for those who don't know me. This is my wife, Katie, and I. That's right. Thank you. I do, don't I?
All for your wife.
Yeah, I definitely got the better end of this partnership. So, we've been married 10 years this year. We have 4 awesome children. This is our eldest daughter, Lucy. She's 7. She takes after her dad. Eating nutritious ice cream, that's what I mean. These are our twin daughters, Maddie and Evie, and they have just started school this year. So it's a bit quieter around our place during the day, which is good. And this is our youngest son, Nathaniel, and he's just about to turn 2 actually in November. Yes, that is a dog's bum that he's hating. We went away on a holiday with some friends, Raglan, January this year, and they had they're a couple who have a bit of background in teaching, and they had a dog that they left behind. His name was Baxter, after James K. Baxter. And so at one point we caught Nathaniel trying to climb on and ride him like a horse. So he just loved him. Everywhere that Baxter went, Nathaniel went as well. Came home with a new word. One of his first words, dogger. If you want to follow up from the presentation tonight, I have a, what do they call it these days, a web presence on the internet. I have a blog called theleadingedgeblog.com, and I've blogged about this particular issue there, euthanasia, and other issues as well. Yeah, please feel free to go there and be hopefully intellectually stimulated and join in the discussion. I'm also going to play you a little video clip that I produced on this issue for Life TV, which is a YouTube channel that I set up last year. As James has mentioned, a new video goes on there every week. I've got a video actually going up either this weekend or first thing Monday, depending on how Kim.com goes, on a 5-step guide to voting well, featuring Batman. So basically 5 principles for how to cast a good vote. And hopefully, most of the people in this room will understand how to vote well, but sadly there's some people out there so it's, who sort of, even first timers, to sort of get their head around it. So there's a video clip that I produced on euthanasia, which we're actually going to watch this evening, which gives a basic introduction and overview. So that's lifetv.net.nz. Before I start tonight's session, it's a pretty heavy topic, as you can imagine. It's some pretty serious business, and we're talking literally here about a matter of life and death. And often too issues that involve people at the very end of life where things can be difficult. I always like to start with this little video clip that I found a couple of years ago actually on the internet, which is a great little piece of satire about the issue, and actually features Jim Carrey, the American actor and comedian, when he was on Mad TV, which was a skit show, a satire skit show in the United States, and it was right at the height of the Dr. Kevorkian era. Some of you remember when Dr. Jack Kevorkian, Dr. Death from America, was he was the sort of looked to as the guru of the assisted suicide movement. He was the guy that was held up as this sterling example of humanitarian medical ethics and helping people in their life. In fact, just recently they even HBO made a television movie called Jack, starring Al Pacino as Jack Kevorkian. Now he's undergone a bit of a whitewashing, because Jack Kevorkian was, you definitely wouldn't put the words, I don't think, humanitarian and Jack Kevorkian together. He had a very checkered past. He at one point he actually tried to import a whole lot of Hitler's artwork. He had a strange fascination with art himself. He tried to import and tour Hitler's artwork around America, which, as you can imagine, wasn't such a popular thing to do. He used to paint his own paintings, which are not particularly good works of art. If you're in the art business, they weren't particularly good. I mean, I guess that's a pretty hard statement to back up these days. But they weren't particularly good. But he painted them with his own. He mixed his own blood in with the paint and things like this. In his biography, he talked about how when he was a medical intern, he'd do the late night shifts. He'd quite happy to volunteer, and he would go and he would find out if patients were dying, he would just go and watch them die in their room. He was fascinated by this idea of watching a patient die. It's really macabre and very weird. And then, of course, after being held up as the sort of leading light who we should listen to on the issue of euthanasia, all of a sudden he found himself in very serious trouble. built a machine actually for people to, effectively what he did was he adapted a version of the lethal injection machine that was used in the States for criminals, and effectively created a home version of it, and touted and promoted this thing around as a way for people to end their own lives. And as you can imagine, that got him into serious trouble, and he faced court charges for his involvement in some deaths, and he did time in jail. And popularity obviously waned after that. But at the height of his peak, Mad TV did this piece of satire. It's a little, about 2.5 minute clip, and it's satirical. So it's a piece of satire, but I think it actually, ironically, it really gets to the heart, I think, of ultimately what is wrong with legalising assisted suicide, physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia. What is it that's so wrong with this? What is the grave problem here? Why is this something that we should be concerned about? And hopefully you'll see by the end of it why I've used this clip.
A lot of you know.
Sorry.
Kevorkian.
Sorry about this. Let's get the volume forward first, though.
Kevorkian. A lot of you know me simply as Dr. Death. As you know, I recently agreed to stop assisting patient suicides. But now my years of experience can be yours in my new book, Dr. Kevorkian's Book of Home Remedies. You know, doctors have long known how to cure common ailments with simple items found around the house. Foot pain got you down, son? Then just soak that foot in a bathtub full of hot salt water with a cup of vinegar and a tablespoon of castor oil. Then just add a string of Christmas lights. Sure, it's messy, but you won't hear him complaining.
Doctor, I'm so depressed. I've got a splinter in my finger.
Well then, try to find a good vein. Then, just use an ordinary hypodermic needle with common household air. Inject a small bubble of air directly into the artery.
Are you sure about this?
Positive. Works every time. Dr. Kevorkian's Book of Home Remedies is full of thousands of these handy cures for such ailments as burns, scrapes, scabies, even headaches. Just listen to one of my recent patients.
I suffer from terrible migraines. Regular doctors couldn't do anything for me. But then Dr. Kevorkian's book suggested many household items to alleviate my pain. First of
I found this 12-gauge just lying around the bedroom closet. That's probably the first good rest she's had in days. And you'll rest in peace, too, when you order Dr. Kevorkian's Book of Home Remedies.
To order, call 1-600-DR-DEATH. Please have your credit card ready. We will not bill you later. Call now.
Okay, so a piece of satire, a bit of black humour, but I think what it does is it actually gets to the heart of what we're really dealing with here. A complete shift in the concept of what medicine is. So what we've got here is a situation where people are now trying to suggest that authentic medical care and therapy could involve the actual termination, the actual deliberate ending of the life of a patient. This is somehow a legitimate form of therapy, as opposed to being with the patient on that final journey and perhaps assisting them with pain relief and comfort and care and other things, because there are plenty of other good options available. We are now actually suggesting that the whole way we will do medicine will shift quite dramatically and change. This is a dramatic shift. This is not just a simple law change that makes a minor adjustment to what's happening. This is a massive change in the very ethos. And the other thing that I'm always reminded of when I watch that video clip is a doctor from the Netherlands who wrote extensively on this, who once said that once you find one reason for euthanasia, it becomes very easy to start finding lots of other lesser reasons to justify euthanasia. And if you look at countries that have legalised it, this is exactly what their track record looks like. It starts out as this supposed thing that is necessary for people in the final stages of terminal illnesses. People who are definitely going to die, there's no hope, there's no cure, they have a terminal illness. This is definitely something that we should legalise for people in that situation. Then of course what happens is it doesn't take long for the goalpost to shift and keep shifting until you get a situation like we now have in Belgium, where they've legalised child euthanasia in the last 12 months. Now, how do you even get your head around the concept of informed consent and a child consenting to an act of suicide or a lethal injection from a doctor? How does that even work in the real world? Does the doctor have the conversation with the child? Do you understand fully what's going on here? Do the parents have the conversation with the child? How does this work without a child being put under the most unfair and I guess I would call it a horrific burden, emotional burden? This idea, wow, maybe this, and all of a sudden this idea becomes, well, maybe this will make the pain go away, or maybe this will make things better for mum or dad or the family, or, you can see how this is such a fraught notion. And they didn't start, though, with child euthanasia, because I guarantee you if they put that on the table right back at the beginning, no one would have bought into this. They would have said, this is ridiculous. But what happens is you start with what seems to be a reasonable proposition, and then quickly and very quickly the goalposts start shifting. In Belgium, that shift has been very quick, much quicker than the Netherlands. The goalposts have definitely shifted there, just took a little bit longer for it to start happening. So why is legalising euthanasia a bad idea? Well, I'm glad you asked. I think often when people think about this issue, they think of it in a frame, it's often a frame of reference that's too narrow. So when people think on euthanasia, the first thing often they do is they maybe think about their own lives, but in perhaps what could happen to them. So they go to their imagination. What would happen to me in the most extreme scenario? Perhaps the most extreme form of disability or pain or illness. What would I want to happen to me? Or they might go to a situation they remember involving a relative or someone that they know about or have heard about in that situation. But most of the time you find it's not something that they have a lot of experience with themselves. It's not something that's grounded in a reality that is immediate or proximate to them. And so they go to the imagination, and then often what happens is people think about scenarios where effectively what they're really saying is, I would want the pain to end. I wouldn't want to be in pain. I remember once hearing a writer talk about this, a very famous academic. I think he summed it up really well when he talked about the fact that if you have a prisoner of war being tortured in a prisoner of war camp, and he says, kill me now, he doesn't really want to die. He wants the pain to end. He wants the pain to end. He wants you to stop. The issue there is the issue of pain that needs to be addressed. He doesn't actually want to die. And so I think what happens is a lot of people think about their own lives or their own situations, and they think, well, what would I want? They often begin to imagine. And interestingly, the research tends to show that in places like, for example, Oregon, where euthanasia is legalised, you have high rates of people who say, oh, yes, I would want euthanasia, but then when they follow up those groups of people and they're in situations where they are facing terminal illness, the actual rate of people who do follow through and then decide for themselves that they definitely want to go through with it is much, much, much lower. So in a hypothetical situation, oh yeah, I definitely want that. But when they're actually in the real situation themselves, completely different decisions are being made altogether. So the frame of reference is often too narrow. So we think about it in this very narrow frame of reference. We don't ask important questions like, what would or could actually change across the whole spectrum of a society? Not just for me. In my situation, if I got an illness or I was in a situation of disability, what would change across the board? They don't think about often questions like, well, what are the risks with a legislative change like this? What are the risks that go along with this? Or are there any potential risks? Who or what is affected and how are they affected by such a change? Because it's not just all of a sudden this notion that, well, if you want to, you can now access some form of legalised suicide, or you can have a physician give you a lethal injection to end your life. All of a sudden, other people are brought into this decision. There's now an expectation that the medical establishment will provide this effectively as a service. That means doctors and nurses are affected by this law change. This means that people who are involved in legislating and policy around these things are brought into this as well. This is not just the simple and very narrow decision that often people are painted as. And the reason that happens is because we don't ask those bigger questions. How does this work across the board? So what are we really saying when we say that when people say that they want to legalise euthanasia? Well, I think there's some very important, I guess, profoundly dangerous and implicit assumptions and things that go along with euthanasia when we talk about wanting legalised euthanasia. First thing I think we're saying is that we are now happy for our doctors and medical professionals to actually become legally endorsed killers of their patients. So there'll be some sort of legal framework which would allow that to happen. So you have to have that, otherwise you can't have doctors ending the lives of their patients. Regardless of whether a patient requests it or not, you actually have to. This is quite a big shift. This is a massive shift in medicine. This is not a simple change. This is quite dramatic. We'll talk about some of the effects of that in a second. We are basically saying that we are now happy for our health system and medical codes of conduct and ethics to consider ending the life of a patient an acceptable form of treatment now. So that's a massive change. Sorry, backwards there. We are saying that we are happy for suicide to be considered not only a culturally acceptable act, but now even a glamorous one. And this is really, really troubling, I think. We live in a culture where we've got a very big issue in this area. We know that. We've just 2 days ago, we had, on New Zealand here, it's today, or in the rest of the world, Suicide Prevention Day. This is a big issue. But what euthanasia does is it completely turns the anti-suicide message on its head. I remember once reading a very good letter that was written to the editor of the Christchurch Press by an elderly lady, and she said, if I was 16 years of age and I said that I felt my life no longer had meaning and I wanted to end it all, people would be rushing to try and convince me not to do that. And they would say, no, there is hope. There is meaning. Your life does have purpose. However, at my age, if I say, well, I would like to end it all because I don't think my life has any more meaning, we've got some people who are now patting me on the back and saying, yes, that's a good decision and expression of autonomy, it's legitimate and everything else. So why? What's the difference here? Obviously there's an age factor, but what is the difference? You see, if we're dealing here with human persons, their fundamental value and worth doesn't shift just because they're older. Their fundamental value and worth doesn't shift because they have a certain condition or ailment, or they have an experience of disability that others don't have. Their fundamental value and worth is still as profoundly important as it was. And what euthanasia, a legalised euthanasia framework does is it basically confuses this notion of suicide, isn't it? I mean, we look at suicide cases, and rightly we should say, this reflects a grave tragedy, a serious, not just a loss of hope, but this is the loss of a human person. And there's something profoundly tragic has happened here. But euthanasia completely shifts that focus and turns that all on its head. We are happy to quantify the value of a human life based solely on arbitrary criteria, such as physical abilities that someone might possess, or the pain that they might suffer. We start to make judgments about whether their life is valuable or has the same worth because of those experiences. And this is a very utilitarian way to look at persons. So instead of taking a dignitarian approach, we look at human dignity as our guiding light. We start looking at utilitarian criteria, and these arbitrary criteria often, as I said, they shift very quickly. And I've heard some terrible statements from people who are in the pro-euthanasia camp about what they would consider. In fact, just recently, Dr. Philip Mitchley got himself in a lot of trouble for suggesting in a Q&A time that the loss of a good golf swing could be justification for someone if they felt they'd lost meaning in their life because of that. And I would suggest to you that what that indicates is that there's someone who needs to discover what authentic meaning actually means in life. That's not a case for someone to say, well, okay, suicide's a good option. It's a situation where we need to be with that person in that difficult time and say, hey, perhaps there is deeper meaning here than what you see, beyond just life on a golf course. Perhaps life is bigger than that. Perhaps. What we're saying is that we are happy to move away from what I think is the communal and familial aspects of human death, because it's a profoundly important part of our culture. Sadly, in the West, I think we've lost touch with a lot of that. There's a lot of reasons for that. But death should be a very communal and familial experience. And my death is not just about me. And in a sense, I think I owe something, in a sense, to my community and my family in my passing as well. There's a sense of something being passed on here that is important to them. So it's not just about me and my passing. It's also about how my passing will affect them. how it impacts people communally, and how it impacts my family. And what happens is euthanasia begins to move us away from that. There's just another case happened in the last week of a man who was notified about his mother who was depressed, who went and sought out euthanasia, where it's legal in Europe, in this particular jurisdiction, went and sought out euthanasia, and they rang him and said, look, come and collect the body. Now, to me, that's not just a tragedy. There's something profound that family has been robbed of. Not just the family member, the person, who has this profound dignity, worth and value, even in the midst of difficulty and suffering, but their passing matters to that family as well. Their passing is important. Look, I had a friend of mine, a young man, and some of you may know actually, Dr. Peter Scanlon, he's in Hamilton. He's very double degree in medicine, really great doctor, really good family man, 6 kids, he's in his 40s, and he passed away very quickly after a quick battle with cancer that started last year, totally out of the way. And I remember several times between the diagnosis and when he finally passed away, only about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I visited with him and spent quite a bit of time just sitting with him and being and talking about stuff and talking through issues and stuff. And even for me, even though I wasn't part of his immediate family, for me there was a lot of profound experiences that I will value, I know, and have actually profoundly shaped my appreciation and view of the world through that experience of journeying with him in that small way. And I wasn't even in his family. And that small part of the journey that I shared with him was profoundly transformative for me and my life. And it really made me, begin to think about this whole notion. I've been talking with the students here in the last couple of days about our life. To find meaning and purpose, our life is, we are called to be self-gift. That's how we find our meaning and purpose. Our meaning, our purpose is found in being gift. And receiving others as gift as well. And the situation